Hi folks, Doc here. I haven't put out a video in, well, several weeks now, and for that I apologize. Life has been absolute chaos. It has kicked my butt from here to Christmas and right back again, and I gotta tell you, my tushy's getting a little bit sore. I went absolutely batty doing emergency services for about a week and a half. In a 4-day span, I turned 56 hours on the clock, and one of those days was an 8-hour day. So just do the math on that madness, and no sooner did I finish that up, but we wound up having to do a rebuild on 2 commercial units next door to each other. Like say 3 weeks worth of work, and we had a week and a half to do them. So yeah, just a little bit mental. I haven't had much wrenching time at all. You probably have noticed that I haven't been on the forums as much or on Facebook as much, because I just, every 5 seconds I have to myself, I've been trying to sleep, and even that's not working too good because I'm far too stressed out. Anyways, no, not a lot has been going on, but I figured I'd take this opportunity. It's a Sunday and I'm not working today. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. I figured I'd just do a little bit of an update video and just, whatever little bit of wrenching here and there that I have been doing, I'll bring you up to speed on. Let's have a look. One of the little things I did do when I had a few minutes to myself goes towards organization. Trying to keep a shop organized can sometimes be a challenge, especially when you're flying around like a nut job doing this and doing that and getting into this task and that task. Tomorrow or the next day I've got a guy bringing me a riding mower with, I think it needs a valve lash adjustment, something minor, but you're bouncing from task to task, and now I've got 5 minutes, I'm going to do that. And stuff gets tossed around, and it's just really difficult sometimes to stay organized. And one of the things that was making me crazy is that, every now and then I'd change a drawer in my toolbox or something like that, and I'd go to get a wrench and I'd whip open the wrong drawer. Oh yeah, that's right, that's not there anymore. So I'm gonna whip open this drawer, and no, that's the wrong drawer. So I decided, well, enough of that silly action. So I whipped out my handy dandy label maker. And if I can just turn your attention to the toolbox, this is what I did. I literally just went from drawer to drawer and just labeled them all to save myself just a little bit of aggravation, hopefully. And I did that to both cabinets, and just had at her. So I mean, well, some of these are pretty obvious. The big drawer is the big drawer, period. But drills, taps, extractors, and hole saws, presto bingo, there it all is. Right? No problem at all. No digging around. I know where this stuff is. If I'm after a multimeter, electronic measuring tools, poof, there they are, along with my temperature gun, my inspection camera, my moisture meter, and my tachometer. Couple calculators, away we go. And very, very simple thing to do. You might want to do it too. And I've noticed in the last couple of days since I've done it, I'm already doing that whip open the wrong drawer thing a whole hell of a lot less. As some of you are no doubt aware, I've been dedicating what little free time that I have had to this turbo here on the Kubota diesel, 2-cylinder Z400 that I'm going to be using in Mule 3, and this turbo has been giving me fits. Not anyone's fault in particular, it's just one of those cases where I'm taking a component that was designed for this particular engine. In this case it was a 1.6 liter, I do believe, Volkswagen diesel out of a Jetta, and trying to make it work on an engine it was not designed to be on. Now initially, and in the process of editing, I'll see if I can scab in an earlier picture from the first setup that I created, and determined that it wasn't going to work out for me. And what I ended up doing was cutting this manifold adapter apart that I'd already fabricated, and I think I showed you guys in a prior video. Cut one flange off, rotated the entire thing over 180 degrees, essentially flipping the turbo upside down, and re-welded the adapter back together. And the reason that I did that comes down to oiling. The problem that I had with the original configuration of this thing is the center section, which contains the shaft bearings, is also where the oil pressure, feed, and return are. And the problem is with the turbocharger upside down, this wastegate actuator diaphragm was on the bottom. And this center section here requires a much larger fitting for the oil return because it's gravity feed than it does for the feed line. So with this thing upside down and the center section rotated so that this was on the bottom, there just very simply was not enough physical room to have the oil drain there. The only way that I could make it fit was to either have a restrictive 90-degree fitting, which is not conducive to gravity flow, or to have the center section cocked over on an angle by several degrees, which is also not particularly conducive to a gravity flow. So what I ended up having to do was unbolt all the components of the turbocharger and rotate everything around so that while the exhaust side, while the turbine side was on top with the wastegate diaphragm facing up, center section rotated right side up again, and then the compressor housing had to be turned around. And what that involved was undoing all the bolts and taking it apart and flipping crap around, and I cleaned a bunch of carbon and stuff out while I was at it. But just to keep things absolutely exciting, one of these bolts that holds the center section to the turbine side broke off in the turbine housing, which apparently is a really common problem. I've done a bunch of research on these things while I've been playing, and while it is a common problem, that does not make my life any easier at all. I mean, 400 billion people have AIDS. The 401st billion person isn't going to go, oh, I feel better because 400 billion people already have it. Anyways, long and the short of it is I had to wrestle this bugger into submission, and I ended up basically having no choice, because of the way things went, to drill and retap the broken one to 3/8/16, which is a little bit larger than the other bolts, but it's going to work. I had just enough clearance to do so, saved the turbo, good to go, got everything reconfigured around, and we're just about set here. So I'll be able to pressure feed the oil in, I'll be able to gravity feed it out. I'll give you some detail on that in a minute. I got everything turned around, reoriented the way it needed to be, and I've got the charge pipe going to the intake on the engine from the outlet of the compressor, and that's pretty much that. I mean, I still have to do an exhaust for it, but I'm going to hold off, see if I can get this turned around. That's going to be off shot, maybe. I still have to do an exhaust for this, but I refuse to even touch the exhaust until the engine is actually mounted in the chassis, because I'm not sure what routing is going to be like. Meantime, back at the farm, I had to reconfigure these pipes in the front too. And what these pipes are for is actuating the wastegate. And for those of you not familiar, I'll give you a real short tour of the wastegate. It's a diaphragm that measures boost pressure as compared to intake vacuum, essentially. So it's got a diaphragm and a plunger in it, and it's got a valve on the back. And the valve, which you cannot see no matter how I turn this right now, basically allows a bypass between the exhaust inlet and the exhaust outlet, so that when that valve is open, the hot exhausts coming through do not spin the turbine. What this does is it limits the amount of boost pressure that's available to your engine, so that you don't blow crap up. I don't want to blow this up. I love this little engine. Anyways, what regulates the opening and closing of that valve is this little diaphragm here. It's a diaphragm with a plunger and a spring, and diaphragms pretty much by nature basically measure pressures and actuate based on pressures. So what this does is, on one side of the diaphragm, this little tube here is it's basically atmospheric. There's a very slight vacuum because your air is coming in, but it's basically atmospheric pressure on the one side of the diaphragm. On the other side of the diaphragm is the boost pressure, and that's this hose here. I didn't get the fittings I wanted, so it's kind of loopy, but she'll do for now. And basically what that does is the two pressures balance out the position of the valve, and when the boost pressure becomes too great, it opens the valve up and it allows some exhaust to escape without forcing the turbine to spin any faster. And then that limits the amount of boost coming off the compressor side and into your intake. So what I had to do is I had to cut apart these hoses and reconfigure them, because once I switched all this around, the factory piping and hoses just didn't fit anymore. So this is what I came up for now. It's not entirely pretty, but it will do the job. What this leaves me with is the requirement for two fittings. On this side, you can see where the gauge is. That's kind of temporary, and it's just sort of marking the place. I wound up modifying the factory oil pressure sender. See if I can get in there for a tighter shot. Probably not. Wound up taking apart the factory oil pressure sender and soldering in a pipe coupling and adapting it to standard pipe fittings, because it was metric, go figure, into a manifold that splits off for an oil pressure gauge, and then the oil feed pipe, which goes around to the feed side of the center section of the turbo. Now, clearances are a little bit tight here. I've left the pipe just sitting there, and what I need to do is I need to order a banjo fitting for that. And a banjo fitting is what you see right here, that little 90-degree deal. You see it on motorcycle brakes a lot, and it's basically a really tight 90-degree pipe fitting, and that's what I need here. Because the oil is pressurized, there's no problem putting it through that 90. On the outlet side, you can see where I whipped out the hole saw, and I cut a hole in my oil pan, and I welded a bung in there, and I used a 45-degree half-inch pipe fitting and an adapter to compression, and I bent up a piece of half-inch copper pipe, and that's my return side. So I've got a nipple there, which I've got to swap out for the correct nipple. I need a barbed nipple, and I'm going to use a really short section of clear half-inch hose. And the reason that it's going to be hose is so that, you know, I've got something to take up a little bit of vibration, so that the copper, you know, doesn't work harden and crack as quickly, although eventually that may happen. And the reason that I want it clear is so that I can visually monitor oil flow. It's all fine and good to say, okay, well, I've got pressure on my oil pressure gauge, so therefore the engine is developing pressure. But until I've got all the kinks worked out of this thing, I want to make sure that oil is actually making it through the turbo. And if I've got a short section of clear line, I can look at it and visually say, okay, fantastic, it's oiling. Now, the last little order of business I've been playing with in my free time is these wonderful ITP rims and Mudlight tires. I've got the full set of rims, and I've got one set of tires. As you may recall from the Wolverine, one set burnt up, which discolored the rims and roasted the tires. I've got to get new tires, and I've got to paint all the rims because the rear pair got kind of... they weren't really physically damaged, but the finish was destroyed. So I'm just going to wind up cleaning them and painting them. But ultimately, these rims and tires are going to wind up on this pile of parts here behind the engine swinging from the ceiling. That is ultimately going to be Mule 3, which you can see I also whipped the front axle off because, well, frankly, it's got to come off anyways, and I was tired of tripping over it. Anyways, the problem being is that M3's factory rear axle there is a 5-bolt on 4.5-inch circle. You can see that one stud is out. I pounded it out, and I'll get that to that in a second. So it's a 5 on 4.5 pattern, really common tractor pattern. And here I've got a 4 on 110 millimeter pitch circle diameter, which, let's just confuse the crap out of ourselves, why don't we? So how do I get these rims bolted onto there? Well, this is where we do a whole whack of careful measurements, which I have been doing, and this is what I've come up with. This is the brake drum, and you can see that there is 2 sets of holes in there now, and what I've had to do was a series of very careful measurements and laid out a 4 on 110 bolt pattern and drilled the new holes. One hole almost kind of lined up, but I did have to hog it out a bit to make it oblong. No matter how I turned the pattern, at least one hole was going to interfere, and that's just the one pitch circle diameter versus the other, and there was absolutely not a thing I could do about that. So I was thinking about perhaps welding the one hole closed and re-drilling it, and I decided that was not necessary on the drum. The drum just slides over the studs and slides over the axle hub. So it's not as critical that the studs fit perfectly within the centers of the holes. If one hole is slightly oblong, that's okay. Where it's critical is over here on the axle flange. So what's going to happen here, it's a little bit dark in this corner and I apologize for that, but I've pounded out a stud. And what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to lay the drum on the flange and I'm going to put a couple of bolts back on the original 5-hole pattern to get everything concentric and lined up. And I'm going to use a transfer punch and I'm going to mark the flange and I'm going to drill the 3 new holes that I need. Then what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to work on that one hole, the one that we're basically reusing, if not adjusting a little bit, and I'm probably going to have to fill it in with a little bit of weld and essentially move the hole downward just by a couple of millimeters, unfortunately, but that is what has to be done and that is what I will do. Once the holes are drilled and everything's lined up, I will pound out the remaining studs and pound them back into the new holes. Now, for those of you not familiar with wheel studs, I don't know if you've ever broken one or had to replace one, they're pretty simple to replace. As you can see, there's basically a spline on the shank, and it's what's called an interference fit in the hole. That spline is bigger than the hole in the flange or in the drum or in the disc or whatever it's in, and it's a pressure fit. So what you have to do in order to get one out is you thread the lug nut on until it's almost flush, and you beat the hell out of it with a BFH and it will come out, and it won't take that much effort as long as you got a decent enough hammer. When you go to put it in again, you get it in as far as you can with your fingers, and usually speaking you don't have room to get behind it with a hammer, and you just, without putting the wheel back on or without putting anything back on except for maybe the drum, you just tighten the lug nut down and it'll draw it in, and that's that. Poof, presto, bingo, done. So that is what I had to do to remove the one stud, and that's what I'll have to do to remove the rest. So ultimately, at the end of the day, these beautiful wheels are going to wind up being adapted to fit on the factory axle that came with the Bannerman chassis. So as much as it would have been nice to get a lot more done in the last couple of weeks, it just was not in the cards. And I'm actually kind of lucky I managed to get anything done at all. Just absolute craziness, nightmare, glad it's about over. The job that I'm on should be done Monday, tomorrow, hopefully. And maybe with a wee little bit of luck, I'll wind up with a couple of days off to recuperate, catch a little bit of sleep, and ease these aching joints. Oy vey. In the meantime, once again, thank you for watching, sharing, and subscribing. I do appreciate your support. And, just as soon as I can get the ball rolling again full swing, I will. I've got a couple of side project plans that I'd like to get into shortly. A couple of those little short projects that, don't go very long from start to finish, so I can turn some stuff out and say, poof, look at this. Within a couple of weeks, we've gone from here's the idea to here's the finished, product, knock yourselves out. So thanks again. Until next time, take care.